Winning the state championship was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I played basketball for my college team, and this year we were unstoppable. We had the talent, the chemistry, and the determination. The final game was intense, but when the buzzer sounded and we were crowned champions, it felt like we had conquered the world. The adrenaline was rushing through my veins. However, little did I know that what would occur later that night would make everything else fade away. After the game, our team captain, Brian, insisted on throwing a party to celebrate. He had this old farm about 45 minutes outside of town, which his family owned but no longer lived in. It had that eerie, isolated vibe, surrounded by woods and far from anyone who could disturb us. We arrived around 9 p.m., and before long, the drinks were flowing like water. I wasn't much of a drinker, but tonight was an exception. After all, we were champions. I drank more than usual, and everyone was laughing, cheering, and playing music so loud the windows shook. Everything seemed like a blur, but I didn't care. Winning made it all seem insignificant. As the night wore on, people left in small groups, but I stayed later than most, still buzzing from the alcohol and excitement. By the time I decided to leave, it was well past 2:30 a.m., and I could hardly walk straight. I wasn't going to crash on Brian's couch, though. I wanted to sleep it off in my own bed. The drive home was long and eerie. I took Route 41, a highway that cuts through miles of dense forest. It's the kind of road where your headlights are the only source of light, and the trees on both sides loom like shadows, stretching toward each other and blotting out the moon. I was exhausted and still feeling the effects of the alcohol, but I forced myself to stay focused. That's when I saw him, a young boy standing in the middle of the road. My heart jumped into my throat and I slammed on the brakes. He looked about 10 years old, dressed in old, tattered clothes, like he was from another era. His face was pale, and there was something unsettling about his eyes, too wide and too dark. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there staring at me. I swerved to avoid him, and the car spun out of control, screeching tires until it crashed into a tree. The impact jolted me forward, my head slamming against the steering wheel. Pain shot through me, and the world blurred for a moment. The airbag didn't go off. It was an old car, my dad's actually, and I muttered a curse, tasting blood. But then I remembered the boy. I sat up, scanning the road, but he was gone. The highway was completely empty. My car was totaled, smashed into the tree. Stumbling out, I searched the road and the woods, but there was no sign of him. I knew what I had seen. He was there, but now it was like he had vanished into thin air. Shaken, I eventually got back into the car, which barely started, making a horrible grinding noise. I drove slowly the rest of the way home, terrified that the boy might appear again. To this day, no one believes me. They say it was the alcohol, or that I must have fallen asleep at the wheel. But I know what I saw. Thanks for watching. If this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon for more scary stories. We appreciate your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. It was a cool night, and I had just turned 16. My family usually ordered pizza for delivery, but this time my mom decided to pick it up so I could get some extra driving practice. We went earlier than usual, and the pizza was ready faster than expected. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. We picked up the pizza and headed home, ready to enjoy our meal. As we were setting up for dinner, about 5 minutes after getting back, we heard the sound of a loud engine outside. It grew louder and louder until, suddenly, a bright red sports car zoomed past our house at breakneck speed. Almost immediately, we heard a deafening crash, followed by the sound of metal scraping. We rushed to the window and saw the same red car had collided with a minivan parked down the street. Both vehicles were completely wrecked. My mom quickly ran outside to check if anyone was hurt and call for help, while my brother and I stayed inside. The scene was chaotic, and soon we were called out to help keep the younger kids distracted while the adults dealt with the situation. And we later learned that two parties were happening on our street that day, one at our neighbor's house and the other at the top of the street, hosted by the owner of the red sports car. Things had spiraled out of control at the party when an unknown man showed up, offering drugs and alcohol. While everyone was distracted, this guy started stealing valuables from the house, and then, in his boldest move, stole the host's red car. He sped off down the street but didn't get far before the police spotted him. Panicking, he accelerated even more, trying to escape, but in his desperation, he lost control and crashed head-on into the minivan. Thankfully, no one was in the van at the time, but it was a close call. The car thief survived the crash and was arrested on the spot. He was later charged with theft, reckless driving, and endangering lives. Though the wreck had caused a lot of damage, everyone was just thankful that no one had been seriously hurt. It was the fall of 1996, and I'll never forget that stormy night. The rain had been pouring for hours, making the roads slick and dangerous. I was driving an old beat-up car along Route 47 with my friend Ben in the passenger seat. He was nervous. We both hated driving in the rain, but we had no choice. We were returning home from a family gathering hours away from where we lived. The rain beat against the windshield, and even with the wipers on full speed, I could barely see the road. The headlights only lit up a few feet in front of us, casting eerie shadows on the slick pavement. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to keep the car steady. Suddenly, we heard a screech, not from us, but from another car. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw headlights speeding toward us. Before I could react, the car swerved and clipped the back of ours. The impact sent us spinning, the tires skidding across the wet road. Time seemed to slow down as we slid sideways toward the guardrail. The crash was violent. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and the front of our car smashed into the guardrail. My head snapped forward and the seatbelt dug painfully into my chest. When we finally stopped, the only sound was the rain pounding on the roof and the hiss of steam rising from the engine. My heart was racing.